Hello and welcome. In this video I'll be showing you how to add Bluetooth to an iPod Classic 5th Gen. So yeah, the chip we're going to be using is called the KCX_BT_emitter V1.7, and it's a pretty simple, easy to use chip. All you got to do is wire up the power to the battery and then wire up left, right and ground audio to the headphone jack. So in theory it's pretty straightforward to install, but it's small and fiddly, so it is still kind of difficult, you know, and it does take quite a while to install as well. And another thing to note, in order to connect your Bluetooth speaker or earphones up to the iPod, you have to pair it with the pair button that's on this board as well. So we have to figure out a way to add a pair button, which I'll show you how we do that later. But yeah, you can't like connect through software or anything like you would on a phone, because obviously there's no Bluetooth option in the iPod menu. Yeah, but anyways, we're using a thick housing, because in this mod we'll be putting in a 3000 mAh battery, and we'll still be using the M SATA adapter as well. The iPod I had here originally had a thin housing on it, and you can still put this in with an iPod that has a slim housing or whatever, but if you do that you're going to have to use an iFlash quad. Yeah, so we'll also be upgrading the battery to 3000 mAh, and that's because the location of the Bluetooth module, I put that where the original battery used to go, like right next to the headphone jack, because we will be wiring this up to the headphone jack. I've seen a lot of these mods in the past on YouTube where they'll wire up the Bluetooth board directly to the circuit board, and I know that there's nothing wrong with that, you can do that. I feel it's better to just wire it up to the headphone jack because, you know, it's less permanent. You're not risking the most expensive part of the iPod, which is the logic board. You're just risking the headphone jack, which you can obviously replace pretty easily. So yeah, and if you ever get bored of the Bluetooth mod, you can always just unclip the back and put on another back that doesn't have a Bluetooth mod on it. So that's why I prefer to do it this way. What you want to do first is just unscrew the your headphone jack and lock switch assembly from your rear housing here. And that's just held in with 4 screws, so just take that out. And yeah, we do need a switch to turn off the Bluetooth module, because otherwise it'll just be constantly draining battery the whole time, and we don't want that because that'll just kill the battery in like a couple of days just from standby. So what I like to do is use the lock switch as the power switch, which does mean we're going to lose the lock switch functionality, which is kind of a shame. But yeah, weighing up the two options, you can either have lock switch functionality and a battery that drains itself in like 2 or 3 days, or get rid of the lock switch and being able to turn off your Bluetooth board. And the ability to turn off the Bluetooth board is a lot more important, to be honest, so that's why I always go with that. Although if you do use, I'll mention this, if you use rockbox, you do have the option to turn off the iPod completely just by holding I think it's the middle button and the play pause button. If you just hold those 2 buttons with rockbox installed, it'll shut down the iPod, which I know that's not the same thing as locking it, but that's still something. We will have to chop the flex cable for the lock switch then, since it won't be a part of that circuit anymore. So yeah, just get out your scissors and do some snips. Yeah, and obviously since this is a separate flex, if we ever want to get rid of the Bluetooth mod or go back to having a lock switch, we can always just have a second rear housing and just take the Bluetooth back off of the iPod and put on a normal back, and then our iPod will be back to normal. That's why I like wiring this off of the headphone jack. It's just it's less permanent and we got more options. And yeah, there's the little chip that we're going to be using here, the Bluetooth board. Got a bunch of holes on the side where you can wire all your stuff up. It's all labelled as well, so you know exactly where to put your wires. And yeah, so I just get my wires from old 30-pin cables that are broken, but I guess you can get them. You can get them from wherever you want. Just make sure you use like thin wires, because it's just a lot easier to work with in this case. If you use wires that are too thick, they end up taking up a lot of room. I know you don't think of wires as taking up much space, but when you're doing a mod like this where everything's really small and everything, you want to be using like thin, appropriately sized wires. Otherwise, it will take up a bunch of extra space and you mightn't be able to seal the whole thing back up. So yeah, and another thing, just make sure you're using like color-coded wires as well, because it is very easy to accidentally wire things up to the wrong spots. So just use a red wire for your positive leads, black wires for your ground, different colors for your left and right. I think I use a white for left and blue for right audio, stuff like that. It makes it easier to troubleshoot and gives you less of a chance of making a mistake. So yeah, so now first things first, we've got to wire up the board to the headphone jack, and that's just 3 little wires: a left audio, right audio and ground. So what I like to do, these are the 3 leads that you have to wire up on the headphone jack. So first what I like to do is just take the headphone jack and just add some solder to the 3 connection points that we need to use. That'll just make it a lot easier to attach the wires as well, and it'll make the connection a lot stronger. So yeah, now just attaching our wires. Oh yeah, and for every wire that I put in this mod, I like to prepare them separately before I attach them. So yeah, if you haven't soldered before, the way you prepare a wire to be soldered is you just take off the insulation at the end, then you twist the wire till it's nice and straight and not like fraying apart and stuff. Then you apply some solder to the end of it so it's nice and soldered up already. You can add some flux too as well, because that just makes the solder flow more easily. And yeah, once you have that ready, you can just attach them to all the connection points. So as you can see here, I put the first one on. I put the white wire to the left audio on the bottom of the headphone jack flex here. And also make sure you have them sticking out in the correct direction. You want them pointing in towards the middle of the iPod. I'll use some pictures to show what I mean, because if you have them pointing in the opposite direction, it'll just make things a lot more difficult to work with. Yeah. And just bending off the end of the leads there so they don't make contact with each other or scrape against the housing or anything. You can just grab your tweezers and wiggle the end from side to side until it comes off. And then just repeating that same process for your right audio and your ground as well. Now, for the next step, to wire it up to the chip itself, I like to cut them pretty short. Maybe give myself 3 to 4 centimeters of wire. And then, we'll tin the ends of all those leads as well. Now grabbing the chip, and I like to put blobs of solder on all the connection points that we're going to wire up first, just because that's how I'm used to doing it. But if you want, you can put the lead straight through the hole and then solder it. I just like to do it like this, since this is what I'm used to. And running those 3 wires in, make sure you put the right wires in the right holes here, because if you don't, that could lead to some issues. And now just wiring up your leads for your positive and your negative wire. Now, one of these leads will be leading to the lock switch, the positive one, and your negative one will go straight to your battery. And the leads that I have running to the battery, I like to make them quite long, like maybe 10 to 15 centimeters in length, because it'll just make it easier when we're reassembling the iPod. If we've got more space to move the battery around, because if it's all too tight in there, there's a chance we could either rip the wires off, or maybe we won't have enough room to put the battery in and stuff. It's just easier if you give a little extra space. Yeah, and now, because all the leads are sticking out the bottom here, what I like to do is snip them down with the pliers, and if any of them aren't soldered properly, just touch them up real quick as well. And I do like to get the file out and sand these down flush, because as I said before, there's not much space to work with in this iPod, so we want to get as much space as we can. And if we file these down flush, that means we can stick the board to the back of the housing and it'll just sit nicely down there. But yeah, after you file it, just make sure that all the none of the pads are joining or anything. You can get your tweezers out and scrape between any pads that may have joined from that process. And yeah, as you can see here, there is a little pair button on the board. But obviously, because the iPod will be sealed up, that pair button's obviously not accessible. So what we're going to have to do is wire up another pair button, and I put that behind the lock switch. I'll show you what I mean when we get to that part of the video, but for now, we have to remove that pair button that's on the board there. Well, I guess you don't actually have to remove it. If you wanted to, you could keep it in and then just wire a wire on each side of the pad, because you can still see the pads where that pair button connects. But I find it easier if you just remove the button, because you just got better access to the pads. So usually I remove it using a hot air rework station, because I have one of those and that's easy to do. But as you can see here, you can just remove it with a soldering iron as well, perfectly fine. Yeah, but now moving on to our lock switch. So undoing it, taking that single screw out, and now we have to remove that little switch from the metal backing there, because otherwise it's hard to solder on. And just applying some flux. Yeah, now this part's actually pretty fiddly. You want your wires sticking out to one particular side, the side of where the corner is on the iPod, because if you have them sticking out the other side, they're going to be interfering with our little pair button mechanism that we're going to have going on there. So yeah, wire them out that way. I can't use the words left and right because it depends what angle you're looking at the button from, obviously, but wire them to the side of the corner of the housing, I guess. And yeah, so first things first, what you want to do is add some extra solder to the parts we're going to wire to. So add a bit of solder to those 2 joints. Not too much though, because if the blob is so big that it makes contact with like the shield of the lock switch, then it'll cause a short circuit and it won't function as a power switch properly. So just put a bit on. So what we're going to do with this lock switch is we're going to wire it from the positive wire on the Bluetooth board. We're going to wire it to that, and then we're going to wire it from there to the battery. And yeah, it'll act as a switch. This will just break that connection and will power off the board. And yeah, you do want to wire this up with the positive wire. If you wire the switch with the negative wire, it's not going to turn off properly, because obviously there's an audio ground wire coming off of the headphone jack. So if you wire the switch up to the ground wire, when you switch it off, it'll still stay powered through the headphone jack, which is the mistake that I made on my iPod Nano 3 Bluetooth tutorial, as someone had pointed out to me in the comments. Thank you for that, because I probably wouldn't have realised without that comment, to be honest. Oh, I think I alluded to it, but the comment confirmed it in my mind that that was the mistake I made. And yeah, so once you're happy with that, bring this whole assembly we've got now just over, and we'll install this in the rear housing at this stage, because it's just a lot easier to work with if we do that. But first things first, we got to reinstall the whole switch mechanism. So grabbing your metal backplate thing, and we'll just be gluing that straight on. Don't use a super hard drying glue here, just use something where you can take it off again. So like double-sided tape or B7000 or something like that. And then apply some glue to your metal plate, and then stick on your lock switch back in the original position. There should be two little black prongs on the back that only allow you to put it in the right position, so you won't be able to install that incorrectly there. And just make sure that lines up with the actual lock switch when you put the white plastic bit back over, and now putting in your screw. Yeah, so for the pair button, what we'll be doing is we'll be installing a little push button behind the lock switch here, or it's now a power switch, but yeah, we'll be installing a button behind the power switch, so you'll be able to push the button in as well. And in order to do that, that means we only install one of the screws on the power switch. So we'll only be installing the screw on the left side of the iPod, not the screw on the top. But that means that that back plate will be only held in with one screw now. So what I like to do is I like to super glue that whole assembly shut using a hard drying glue. And then also, as you can see here, there's a little plastic prong that's sort of sticking up in there. I like to shave that off because it'll make the click mechanism just feel a lot more smooth and work a lot better. So yeah, just take that off with your box cutter or whatever you got there, and then I just file that down a little bit as well, just make it nice and flush, give us some good clearance and everything, so the button doesn't get stuck halfway through the press. Yeah, and again, just sealing that whole mechanism shut with a bit of super glue. And now installing all of this in the rear housing. Yeah, so first things first, what we want to do is we want to take that little plastic piece that's at the bottom, that's just held in with two screws, goes around the 30 pin port. So just unscrew your one off your original housing and attach it to your new housing. And yeah, as you can see, I put down some Captain tape at the bottom there, so we don't short out the connection points on the bottom of that Bluetooth chip with the rear housing. It shouldn't short out on this rear housing because this one has paint, but just do it anyways. Yeah, and I also put in that little foam piece as well that was previously in there. That'll just stop the headphone jack from being able to wobble up and down as much. You don't have to put that in, but I know it's a good idea. And now taking our headphone jack and just putting that back in there. Oh yeah, I put some Captain tape over the connection points on the bottom of the headphone jack as well. I don't know if that's necessary, probably unnecessary, but I just did it anyways. And screwing that in with our two original screws. One other thing to note about those two screws is the little flaps, flanges, whatever you want to call them, that those screws attach to can very easily bend. So if you're having trouble getting these screws in, just make sure you haven't accidentally bent those screw holes out. And if you have, you can just bend them back with tweezers, pretty easy. And yeah, now to screw in our power button here, just reinstall that and grab a screw and put that in. Oh yeah, and now I like to tape down the Bluetooth board as well, just right there next to the headphone jack. It'll just stop it from wobbling around in there, and it'll just make everything a lot easier and look a whole lot neater. So yeah, just tape that down, push it over towards the headphone jack side as much as you possibly can as well, because we'll need space for that pair button to go in. And yeah, on to installing our pair button. Well, I'll show you a picture of the button that I'll be using. It's just one of these simple push buttons with the 4 legs, as you can see here. These are pretty common and they're really cheap. You'll be able to get these from like any of those electronics stores, or you can get them online. You can get like a bag of 100 for like $2 or something. So yeah, these things are really, it's just a generic button pretty much. So just get yourself one of these, and what we'll be doing, we'll be cutting off 2 of the leads on one of the sides and then shaving it down flush and then sticking that to the rear housing. So when we push in the lock button, it'll activate this push button, and that'll just act as a pair button, and then we'll wire that up to the pair button on the Bluetooth board. Yeah, but if you have decided to go for a thick housing, as I have here, you'll notice that that button won't line up. It just won't line up directly, so we have to figure out a way to elevate that button a little bit, and you can do that just by super gluing in just anything that's like a couple centimeters thick. What I ended up using was just an old home button from an old iPod Nano 2nd gen, I think it was. So I just took that home button and filed it down to the point where it was like flat. I put some super glue, glued it down, and then glued our little button straight on top of that. Yeah, but for the glue that you use here, you do want to use a really hard drying super glue. So the type of glue that I tell you not to use for screen repairs, that's what you want to use for attaching this button, because yeah, obviously we don't want this button to come off. We want it to be in there super solid, because it will be having force applied to it and everything. So yeah, make sure the button's fully unpressed when you install it, and make sure that the button is hard up against the thing so that when you press it in, it actually clicks the button properly, you know? Because if you put the button in too far back, obviously the click's not going to be very satisfying. And then your lock switch will also sit a little bit recessed, which will make it hard to flick the switch as well. So just making sure you get all this stuff in the right position. If you get super glue inside the button mechanism, it's going to super glue the button shut. So you got to watch out for that as well. Oh yeah, and I should mention as well, this pair button mechanism is not my idea. I've gotten this from another Bluetooth mod YouTube video. I think the guy who did the video was called Nico Michi or something. I'll link his video in the description if you want to check his Bluetooth mod out as well. I think that idea of the pair button is a super solid idea, because the only other way to add a pair button to this would be to, I don't know, drill holes in the back of the iPod, or you'd have to make an entirely custom back, maybe 3D print a back that has button mounts in it or something, who knows. If you don't want to use the 3.5mm headphone jack at all, you could chop that entire part off and then just stick your pair button out of the audio jack port. Or you could even put a on-off button sticking out of that port, and then do the pair button behind the lock switch, and then keep your lock switch as well. That's another alternative, but then you'd lose your headphone jack obviously. So yeah, I don't really want to lose headphone jack functionality when I do this mod. I feel that's pretty important. Although none of the phones these days even have it, so if you've already gone fully Bluetooth, fully wireless, then I guess it's not that big of a deal. But that's definitely not for me. I still prefer wired earphones, to be honest. I just do this mod because it's cool and because people want to see it. Yeah, but now that that button's in, it's time to install our battery. So as I said earlier, we'll be using a 3000 milliamp hour battery for this mod, and that's good because it doesn't interfere with that whole section up there. It just goes in on top of the hard drive space. Yeah, as I said, we'll be installing an AliExpress M-SATA adapter in this iPod, the one that you saw earlier in the video. So that is confirmed to fit with the 3000 milliamp hour battery in a thick housing, but it is, as I said, it's very borderline. It's a very tight fit. I'd prefer to be using an iFlash adapter, to be honest. I haven't tried out the iFlash M-SATA adapter, but something like the original iFlash or an iFlash Dual or an iFlash Quad, the SD card ones, those will have plenty of clearance. So you can go with one of those if you like, and it'll work a bit better. Yeah, and as I said again, if you want to go for a slim housing and a 3000 milliamp hour battery, you can use the iFlash Quad. That is confirmed working with this mod, as I've already done one like that, and I'll show you that iPod at the end of the video. But yeah, just wiring this up now. And at this stage, you'll realise why you want long leads on your wires there, because it just makes the whole thing a lot easier to work with when you're putting the battery in. So first, stripping the ends off the wires, give them a twist, putting some solder on them. Yeah, so once you've prepared your wires, now we got to prepare the battery. So first, take your 3000 milliamp hour battery and remove some of that Captain tape. Comes off pretty easy. And now peel back the top there to reveal the connection point of that flex cable. We want to wire these wires up to the connection points there near the flex cable. That'll still give us all those protections of the BMS, whereas if you wired it straight up to the cell, then we'd be foregoing all those BMS protections or whatever. Yeah, the BMS will, I think it just stops the battery from draining below a certain voltage, which is important because if it goes too low, it can permanently damage the battery. Yeah, and make sure you copy the orientation that I put these in. Have them sticking out the top like that. If you have the wires facing the other direction, then when you go to fold that thing back over, well, your wires will be in a very strange position. Make sure you put them in the right one, otherwise you're going to cook the chip. As you can see, when I attach the second wire, you can see the light start flashing. And then I used the switch to just turn off the circuit, so we've confirmed that that switch is working, that the board is getting power at least at this stage. Now sealing this whole thing back up. Actually, I do the wrong thing here when I put the Captain tape on. So what you want to do is you want to have the wires running out the side of the battery, the side that's closest. I'll show a picture of how you should do it, but I ended up taking this battery apart and redoing it like this later on. And the reason you want to do it like that is just because it gives you more clearance, pretty much. I was finding when I was trying to seal the iPod up, the wire, that very small little 1 or 2 millimeter wire was pushing up against the M-SATA adapter, and that wasn't giving us enough clearance to fully shut the iPod, which was a shame. And yeah, that's how tight the M-SATA adapter. So yeah, after you've put your Captain tape back on, there's just one more step with this rear assembly here, and that is to wire up our two little wires to our power button. So just attaching those two to the button itself, and then wiring them up to the two pads on the board where the power button that we took off earlier used to be. And yeah, now we're done with our rear assembly there. Yeah, so as you can see, the whole mod is sort of contained within the rear housing here, and that's pretty convenient, because if we don't want to use the Bluetooth mod anymore, we can always just take the rear housing off or put on another iPod. Or so now just reinstalling this back into our iPod, clipping it in. Oh yeah, no, before I reassemble the whole thing, what I like to do is obviously test it and see if it works, especially on a 6th or 7th gen. I know this is a 5th gen, so it's easy to open, but that applies even more on a 6th or 7th gen. So just testing it out, testing your Bluetooth, and testing all the other functionality of the iPod that we haven't broken anything. So test your headphone jack as well and all that stuff. And as you can see, it is working. Oh yeah, and before we seal this back up, I decided that I would just switch out the front housing and click wheel on this iPod for some brand new ones, just because this one was really beat up. So I put in a brand new black click wheel and a white front housing, which I think looks really cool, with the black rear housing as well. It's like a little black and white iPod, a little panda themed iPod going here. Yeah, so if you're going to install a new front plate like me here, just make sure you don't get any dust between the screen. That's the most annoying part of changing the front plate out. It's quite difficult to put a new one on without getting dust in there. It took me quite a while, at least. Yeah, as you can see, I like to sort of tape down the M-SATA adapter a little bit. Yeah, usually I put foam in between the tape there, as I had shown in my iPod Classic 5 Ultimate Repair Guide video. But I don't do that here because the space is a lot more limited. So I just tape the adapter straight down there to the logic board. And yeah, now installing our headphone jack flex goes in pretty easy. And connecting our battery in there. And at this stage, if you made those wires longer for the battery, at this stage you'll be thanking yourself, because you'll have a lot more free space to work with here. Yeah, but if your wires are kind of long, make sure all the excess is tucked up at the top there, because if you've got long wires and they're going in between the battery and your hard drive, then that could be causing some clearance issues and could potentially damage something when you go to seal everything back up. So just make sure you got those at the top. Make sure your wires are out of the way when you're sealing the iPod back up. Yeah, maybe turn the iPod on when you're sealing the thing back up as well. It's just more easy to see if there's like any funny pressure being applied behind the screen. If everything's in the right position, there shouldn't be, but I don't know, if like the M-SATA adapter falls out of position or one of the wires gets in between there, it might cause some pressure on the back of the screen. So if you're doing it when the screen's turned on, you'll be able to check, you'll be able to see that. Yeah, so I will be offering this mod as like a mail-in repair service on my website. So if you want me to add Bluetooth to your iPod, just go over to partspluspods.com.au and there should be an option for a mail-in Bluetooth upgrade for the 5th, 6th and 7th gens. I'll have to do some more testing first though before I offer that as a service, but the plan is for that to be a thing within the next sort of 2 or 3 weeks here. So if you're interested in that, keep your eyes open for that. And yeah, I'll also have the rear housings available as well. It'll just be like a Bluetooth upgrade kit. I'll have a separate video on that coming out soon as well, like a how to install the Bluetooth upgrade kit sort of video. Yeah, if you do want to do the mod yourself as well, I'll have links for the chip and all the other parts featured in the video here from my website and also from AliExpress as well. And yeah, now that iPod's nice and sealed up and everything is good, I'll probably give everything a second test now that we've got it sealed back up, just in case something's broken. Probably it shouldn't have, but you never know, it's always worth testing it. And yeah, so before we end the video, I'd just like to show you this other Bluetooth iPod that I'd made earlier. I'd shown this one on a TikTok that I made a couple months ago. This is my first attempt at the Bluetooth mod. And yeah, so this one I used a 3000 mAh battery and an iFlash quad, and I was able to get that in the slim housing pretty easily as well. It wasn't like a tight fit or anything. It just seemed to all fit nicely in there. So yeah, I think ideally, if you want to go all out with this mod, that's probably what I would do. I'd go for the slim housing, because the slim housing just looks a lot better with these iPods. And the iFlash quad, although it is the most expensive of all the adapters you can use, yeah, it's a good option, power efficient option, and just works really well. Yeah, and as you can see, I've got rockbox running on this iPod too, and a custom purple back as well. But yeah, I'll just show you the size difference between the slim and the thick when it's all fully assembled. So yeah, there is quite a difference. I do prefer the slim housing quite a lot, to be honest. But yeah, still works with the thick, and the thick housing will give you the option to use the M-SATA adapter off of AliExpress, which is obviously a lot cheaper than an iFlash quad. So whatever you want to do there. And yeah, links to buy all the stuff I featured in the description again. So if you like this tutorial, give it a like, subscribe to the channel. We just recently passed 1,000 subscribers in like a couple weeks ago, so thank you guys for that. There'll be plenty more of these iPod videos coming out soon. So yeah, thanks for watching, see you next time, and bye.